cross at the net.
Vučković, can you believe it?
First volley from Medvedev is over. Brady's got the line. She's got it perfectly. It's a glorious shot from Osaka. Brings Medvedev in. And Medvedev slams it back. Djokovic, yes! What an amazing piece of sporting theatre.
Hello, I'm John Hoovenars, and welcome to the AO Show. On today's episode, Novak knows no limits. A sixth Wimbledon crown puts Djokovic on par with the greatest ever.
I consider myself best, and I believe that I am the best.
What the win means for the world number one, his Olympic plans, and the record books.
I think his focus is particularly on the US Open, not only for the Grand Slam, but also to get that overall record and overtake Roger and Rafa.
Ash, the toast of Australia. Yvonne Goolagong-Cawley reacts to Barty's historic Wimbledon win.
We both just looked at each other and said, oh, she's got it. She's going to be our next champion.
And Craig Tiley on a momentous weekend for Australian tennis and what's to come.
Late nights, but well worth it. And how much fun it was to watch Ash and Dylan both win those titles was pretty special for all of us.
That's all ahead on the AO Show.
I probably started thinking about, trying to reach the record of most Grand Slams won and most weeks at number one historically, probably about, say 2 to 3 years ago. Before that, it seemed a little bit out of reach, but it's really fortunate for me, and it's incredible that it's all coming together in the same year. That's something that I didn't expect, but I always dream of achieving the biggest things in sport.
Novak Djokovic remains on track for the calendar Grand Slam following his record-equalling 20th major title at Wimbledon. The Serb fought back from a set down against Italy's Matteo Berrettini to triumph in 4 sets. Joining me to discuss the result and its implications are Todd Woodbridge, Casey Delacqua and Peter Mercado. Welcome to you all. It was a nervous start, Todd, but a clinical finish from the champion.
It was a nervous start. You guys, had the opportunity to call it. I was kind of perplexed at the start from Novak. Opened with a double fault. He looked completely out of sorts, and in some ways it was very much like we saw from Karolina Pliskova on the women's side to start a final, and something that I certainly didn't expect to come out of Novak.
Well, it's good to see he's human. First of all, I think in the fact that we all, even the best of the best, experience those type of feelings or moments, but it's just an extraordinary feat from Novak, isn't it, to equal the record, but in that match particularly overcome those nerves and then really be fairly dominant throughout the rest of the match.
It wasn't one of those finals, only a couple of times where it really hit the heights where you felt that both players were right up at that top level at exactly the same time. You're right, Todd, that was a very untidy start from Novak, and it may have been, I think you were commenting in the coverage, that we saw them as they're about to walk out onto court, and Matteo was standing there and he was ready, doing all the right things, and you mentioned that everything works like clockwork, but actually Novak was late, so they came racing down the corridor, and instead of waiting, taking a breath, pausing, they just ran straight out onto court, and then they were straight into the match. But he just does enough to keep pushing himself against these guys time after time after time. It seems to be the same old script. I thought it might have been flipped on its head when Matteo took that first set and won that tiebreak and the momentum and the crowd and everything like that. But I think it was 3-2 or 3-3 in that fourth set where he's like he hits a level and then he just goes +1 each time just to get over the top of these guys, and that they can't go with him. And another worthy champion. And he was the favourite. He was almost unbackable at the start of the 2 weeks, and he managed to come through. Yeah,
you touched on something there that I find interesting with this group that are trying to challenge him at the moment, because in that beginning of the match, Matteo almost looked down the other end in shock that Novak had started poorly, and he had these opportunities and didn't take them. And then Novak goes up, 5-3, looks like he's going to serve the set out and doesn't. And I think these younger guys are they're not taking that chance when they get it. And, you know, the great players like the big four that have been there, and Stan Wawrinka, and when those chances have come in those matches, they've taken them. And I think the mentality's got to be that they've got to try to get to that point where to realise that Novak, he is human, like Casey, like you said, and not expect him to be able to rise to those levels, because you can't keep doing that all the time. So they have to be willing, I think, to get to that moment at some point in these bigger events as they come in the future.
Yeah, the only other thing I wanted to add, and I think I mentioned it in the last podcast we did, Todd, was that management of best of five tennis for me. Pete mentioned it in the match against Berrettini as well in the final, but it feels, I don't know the right wording, but Novak's tennis just seems to get better and better in different ways at different times, and I think that's just why he is the best, I believe at the moment, for a long time, because of that management at Grand Slam level and the way that he goes about his tennis.
I think also he neutralises weapons, and that's what you see him do so well. You talk about him getting out into the corners of the court and making these extra balls and being able to return the very best of serves. Everybody's weapon that they have that they can throw at him, he has this neutraliser. Imagine if we all had our own neutraliser.
Well, it'd be magnificent. But it was a time. But the thing was, though, it's not just that neutralising effect, it's that ability to turn that defence into attack when he is pulled wide, particularly on that backhand side. There are a couple of times where he makes Berrettini play that extra ball, but he gets there so quickly that he's got time to hit it properly. And it's not a defensive shot, but it's one that he turns into an attacking shot. And immediately, as soon as he hits that ball, he's ready to come forward. And, you know, that was crucial, because it's just that relentless pressure. And even though he had his little dips in the match, he could still apply that pressure there too. The usual thing, Todd, of the crowd, they were jumping on the Matteo bandwagon. I suspect probably more because they wanted to see a contender finally come through rather than it being a Djokovic thing. But then he turned him around in the end.
Yeah, he did. And I we talked about that in the coverage, is that you don't want to sort of wake that sleeping giant in Novak. And the crowd did. And as soon as they did, that's a moment in that match when he switched it on again. And I really, from a perspective of sitting in a broadcast booth, though, to have the crowd to actually be a third factor in a match again is so brilliant. You forget how much they can actually sway things at certain moments and build pressure on players. So that was, you know, first time we've had that since the pandemic started, and it really was so good to hear and to feel and be a part of.
Well, the win puts Djokovic 3/4 of the way towards a calendar Grand Slam, with the additional possibility of the rare Golden Slam, a feat only achieved by Steffi Graf back in 1988 after her 4 majors and gold medal at the Seoul Olympics. But Djokovic himself has cast doubt over whether he'll even be playing at the Tokyo Games later this month.
I'll have to think about it. Right now, as I said, my plan was always to go to Olympic Games, but right now I'm a little bit divided. It's kind of 50-50 because of what I heard in the last couple of days.
Do we reckon he's going to play?
He said 50-50, didn't he? And I think the big question, it's he will want to. It's about scheduling, isn't it? Because he's had to bounce back from the French 2 weeks this year instead of 3. And he did it incredible. Now he's got to get through here physically and emotionally with less than 2 weeks almost to get to Tokyo. I think it's more important for him to win the Grand Slam than the calendar Grand Slam. And I guess we'll see in the coming days.
Yeah, I agree with you, Todd. I think his focus is particularly on the US Open, not only for the Grand Slam, but also to get that overall record and overtake Roger and Rafa. I think that's his end goal. We know that the Olympic draw is quite depleted on the tennis side anyway. There's been big names that have pulled out already. And I think it comes down to being in a pandemic, scheduling changes, a number of factors. So it will be an interesting one to see what he decides. But I don't think we'll all be surprised if he doesn't head to Tokyo.
But also, let's go back to the crowds. there's nothing there. That whole Olympic experience, and I'm a very pro-Olympian because I've had that experience of being able to win a medal. It is not going to be like an Olympics as we know it on any level, let alone just tennis. So I think every athlete from every sport's looking at it with a disappointment before it's even started. And I feel like it doesn't have that same luster this time round as it would normally. And that's for everything, not just for our sport.
To be able to play here at Wimbledon was nothing short of a miracle, and I think to be playing pain-free through this event was incredible. And it's funny sometimes that the stars align. You can think positively, you can plan, and sometimes the stars do align. You can chase after your dreams.
Well, we're all Aussies here on the round table and all lovers of Wimbledon, and well, we got the perfect marriage of those two elements in the wee hours of Sunday morning here in Australia as Ash Barty claimed her second major title, her first at Wimbledon against Karolina Pliskova in 3 sets. Casey, a close friend of Ash, no doubt you've been in touch with her across the weekend?
Yeah, I sure have. I think for Ash, it's one of those, moments where it's going to probably take a while for it to sink in. And I think from a nation perspective, it's one of those moments. I think if you think back as a viewer, Cathy Freeman, there's a number of moments in your career where you're just like, yep, that's a big moment in Australian sport, and I think that was for Australia and for Ash to win. But she's doing really well. She's going to have a week off, which I think she thoroughly deserves. She, she's celebrated low key with her team, called home. She doesn't really love the fanfare too much anyway. So I think, being over there, she's just, like I said, low-key celebrating her achievements, and so she should be.
Yeah, it was amazing to watch. It's been amazing watching from this side of the world. Normally we'd be over there and be right in amongst it. And, there's usually a huge Aussie contingent that surrounds the tournament and supporting all the Aussie players and everyone else around the place too. But the way that the nation got behind as the campaign started to build, because it's a real building process. And we see from champion players the way that they can build into the 2 weeks of a major. So, tinkering with the game, but getting better and better each time. Even more meritorious considering what she said afterwards about her hip and the injury and all of that sort of stuff, the fact that she was out there at all. But just the euphoria and the emotion from not just tennis people, because obviously the hardcore tennis people are staying up into the small hours of the morning, but, everyone else in the Australian community was watching and getting right behind her. And, we've got someone to be proud of, and it was a fantastic performance, a magnificent final.
I don't think I've ever felt so engaged in somebody else's tournament or match before. I've watched great matches, played these types of matches, not in Wimbledon singles final, but close in terms of a doubles. But usually they were about me, but I've never felt that engrossed about her performance, because I felt like you said, Casey, these were iconic Australian moments with an America's Cup, Cathy Freeman winning at the Sydney Olympics. And I knew that this was going to be one of them. I really felt that, and that was really exciting. And I have had this euphoria for like 48 hours. And I'll be honest and say that as a broadcaster there, sitting in that, I don't know that it'll get much better for me. But then it took a lot of work to be ready to try to switch on to do the men's final, because I felt absolutely zapped and I didn't hit one ball.
Yeah, it was just the whole 2 weeks watching Ash, and you obviously were there, Todd, along the way, and as you said, so invested in the tournament. And I think once Ash really got over that first week, past that first week, things started to shift, and I felt really confident when I saw her play Barbara Krejcikova and then even the win against Siniakova, and I could just sense this real calmness. Hey, I've got through the first couple of matches, particularly with the injury. There wasn't a huge expectation from Ash's part in terms of, I think, playing her best tennis in the early days, which I think really helped her. And then, she played some great tennis at the end of the tournament. And I think I've mentioned it a few times since the win. It's her mentality and how she's learnt from her mistakes in the past in regards to how perhaps she's dealt with moments and how she's worked on that to when she is in those moments or when she's been down, how to really stay calm and composed and to make the most of those moments, which she did in a number of matches, 5-2 down against Kerber, against Pliskova, and even in the final, a few hurdles to overcome, but her mindset was second to none.
Expectations, the word you used a moment ago, that for me, you know how there's this karma sometimes happens in sport. You can read things happening. What I think, there was no expectation on her. She was the world number one, but you know, when we started the tournament, it was throw a dart at the board and anybody was going to be able to win it. That's what it looked like. So the fact that she wasn't, playing brilliant, hadn't won the French, had an injury, it all just played out really nicely for Ash. And, when she looks back, I bet you she'll never probably play a major from here, where it felt like there was this opportunity that lay there without the world going, this is yours, you should be winning this. Because I certainly didn't feel that at the beginning of the tournament.
No, but the outpouring of emotion at the end too, universally across the tennis community. Like, it wasn't just the Australians that were cheering her on. It was the supporters in the stands, and you talk about the crowd effect and everything like that. But, around the tennis world, around the tennis community, and I think, people have talked about Yvonne a lot, obviously, the connection there. But, one of the other similarities was how popular Yvonne Goolagong was as a player in the locker room and universally liked by fans. Fans would go along to watch her play, and we're seeing the same thing here with Ash. In terms of the final itself, I mean, the impressive thing, one of the other words that's being used a lot, not just in tennis but around the world at the moment, is resilience. To, be up and down in matches against an opponent who herself was going in and out of the match at various times. But in that third set, to really stand up, to really keep the emotions in check, but just to play her game. We've talked a lot about the weapons, the all-court game that we saw, even 10 years ago at these courts when Asha was there when she won the junior title. We saw, something special that was building there. But to deploy all of the weapons, to use all the tricks in the bag to get over the top of someone, it's an enjoyable game style to watch, but it is just so effective, and we're now right on the biggest stage of them all.
There's one point and one shot. You talk about all of those pieces, Pete. The first point of the game that she served it out, you talk about Yvonne and classic shots. She gets this high backhand volley in the most awkward position, somehow gets the top of the racket to the ball to control it, to get it over. That point, that shot of everything in that match was the key to almost winning, because it allowed her to free up to serve that match out.
Particularly from when she was serving for the match in the second set, and the first point of that game she double faulted, so to come out and play an extraordinary point like she did, I think gave her the confidence to close that match out. But the emotion for me was something else in this match particularly. Even sitting on my couch in my pajamas, I had a few beers while I was watching at home, and it was I just was so sitting there so proud of Ash. But then at the end of the match, in a matter of seconds, the way her emotion really got to me, because I could see how much she just, she's so professional about how she goes about everything. But in that moment, the emotion just really took over, and I think it was beautiful to see. And then her post-match interview was wonderful. And then in the corridors as well was great. I think the funniest thing for me was I heard Mel Omazzolo, the physio, say to Ash, all right, should we go and have a stretch now? And Ash was like, just as a joke. But I thought that was quite funny, just their bit of banter in that moment as well. But yeah, just extraordinary. So much emotion from everyone, I think, that's known what Ash has gone through along her journey. She's got the French Open, but for some reason, us as Australians, we see Wimbledon as almost like the holy grail of tennis, that centre court. We stay up as youngsters to watch Wimbledon, and I think this was a massive feat for Australian sport.
As has been well documented, Barty's triumph coincided with the 50th anniversary of Yvonne Goolagong's maiden Wimbledon crown in 1971, prompting this reaction from Barty in her post-match on-court interview.
You also, Ash, love the history of the game, and it's a lovely tribute to one of your heroines, your mentors, Yvonne Goolagong-Cawley, 50 years ago since she won her first Wimbledon title. And I know she's a big part. She means a lot to you.
She does. I hope I made Yvonne proud.
No, you did.
Responding hours after the win, Goolagong was bursting with pride for her young protege.
Oh, she certainly did. I mean, she made me proud from the first time I saw Ash. And she must have been about 13, and she was playing at the Australian Open. And Roger and I stayed there and watched a bit, and we saw one whole point which she had showed all the skills. She did the slice, the volley, the smash, everything in one game, and we both just looked at each other and said, oh, she's got it. She's going to be our next champion. So look at her now.
Well, it's been quite the weekend for Australian tennis, with both Ash Barty and Dylan Alcott capturing titles at Wimbledon. Joining me now is Tennis Australia CEO and Australian Open Tournament Director Craig Tiley. Craig, no doubt a sleepless weekend, but a very good one for Australian tennis.
If you love tennis and you love tennis in Australia, then it was the pinnacle. It was really exciting time for all of us, and late nights, obviously because of the time zone, but well worth it. And how much fun it was to watch Ash and Dylan both win those titles was pretty special for all of us.
You've overseen some great moments in your tenure here at the organisation. Let's talk about Ash firstly. Where does this achievement at Wimbledon rank in achievements by Australian athletes?
I think it's the number one. I think the circumstances around it, Ash, French Open, having to withdraw with an injury and then not having the preparation she would have ideally liked to have had, and then to go and play the best players in the world, the French Open champion, and to come out and play the final she did against Carolina, also deserves a lot of credit and played really well. It was a magnificent women's final, and of course for Australia, Ash winning just added to it, and we shouldn't forget, it's been 60 years since Rod Laver won. It was 50 years at Wimbledon. It was 50 years since John Newcombe did, and of course 50 years since Yvonne Goolagong-Cawley's first Wimbledon title in 1971. And Ash celebrated and recognised that by wearing a replica of her dress and of Yvonne's dress. And I think there were so many stories around the big story, and of course by winning it, it just validated everything. And I think the champion that Ash is, everyone wanted her to win because she deserved it too.
Have you been in touch with Ash's team, and what's been the general response that you've heard to her?
Calmness after. I think just a bit of reflection and achieving what they did. I've been in touch with members of her team and had some responses. They're greatly appreciative of our constant contact, but also the role that we've played as well. Everyone's played a role, but more directly, it's really Ash and her immediate team, her family, her close friends, and we've always said in the development of an athlete, it takes a village, starting way back from Jim Joyce, her coach in the formative years, all the way through now to Craig Tyser and others in between. But that village should be incredibly proud of Ash's achievement. Ash has done it. She's done it with a team behind her, a great team behind her, as has Dylan. And, having been a Wimbledon champion, Wimbledon means a lot to Australian tennis. We've got a great history there. There were many years where Australians won it consistently. We've had great champions. And over the last 30 years, not as many. The most recent being Leighton. And so now, to have been in a position now in 2021 where you can have Ash as a champion and the number one player in the world, and on top of the type of person she is, she's going to draw thousands of people to play the game.
And let's not forget the wonderful achievement of Ajla Tomljanovic reaching the last eight.
Well, made some major breakthroughs of Stormy Sanders getting to the semi-finals, the women's doubles. John Peers the same in the mixed doubles. They've done a great job in doubles. Dylan, we mentioned earlier, winning. He's on track to potentially win all the majors this year, and including Olympic gold. I don't want to put too much pressure on him, but that would be great. And then Ajla, this is her best performance, reaching the final eight, and we did communicate back and forth, and And I'm very proud of her because she's been through a rough time of it, and then we've embraced her as an athlete, as a player, as a person, and I couldn't be happier for her. And hopefully this is part of her ongoing breakthrough in the game.
You just mentioned the possible pressure that might come on the shoulders of Dylan Alcott for that potential golden Grand Slam, but if there's a personality in tennis that can handle it, it's him.
Well, you would argue Novak Djokovic would be the same in the way he's managed the last 3 Grand Slams that he's played. But the US Open is going to be, it's tough in these conditions because you may be unfortunate and contract COVID and then you're out. So there's a lot of extenuating circumstances that can put added pressure on it. But yeah, there's no question that I think Dylan's handling of the pressure, he'll be fine, he'll be tough, and I know he'll be thinking about the speech he needs to make afterwards at some point during the match because he's very good at that as well.
And finally, we've seen the unfortunate cancellation of the Australian Grand Prix last week. What does this mean for the Australian Open and the planning for that event?
Well, what was required by the Grand Prix was the specific conditions to be determined now, which is very difficult to do. And in the case of tennis, we know that the conditions need to be different to what they were last year. But we also know over the next 3 months, most of the Australian population is going to get vaccinated. And hopefully by the end of the year, we're all vaccinated. And that should be the case because the vaccine doses will be available. And then it's going to present a very different environment. So the conditions of quarantining we expect to be different, and we're working closely with Victoria and the federal government to ensure that is the case. And now the focus of all the governments as well as everyone is on the Australian Open. So with the Grand Prix now not happening, and it's unfortunate for the MotoGP fans and Formula One fans, but they'll get to see it again in April next year. But for us, tennis is the next major global event that draws the kind of global audience that it does, and it's the biggest one leading in to the year. And so we need to, and we will, and we want to make it happen, and we need to get the players here. So the conditions in getting the players here will be different to the ones that are defined today, because today we don't have the whole population vaccinated, and not enough of the players are vaccinated, but that'll all change by the end of the year. So under those conditions, we'll see different isolation/quarantine requirements, and then hopefully an Australian Open, which we fully expect in front of 100% crowds and players enjoying getting back to some sense of normalcy, and that's our objective. A lot needs to happen to get to that point, but we're pretty confident we'll get there.
That's all for this episode. Join me again next Friday as we preview the Tokyo Olympic Games. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe, and if you like what you hear, please rate and review so more fans can enjoy the AO Show.